mega profitable innovations. But our next guest says that these giants have rolled the dice past go and collected the world, using what he dubs Jedi mind tricks to convince us of a dubious reality. Scott Galloway is an entrepreneur, business professor, and author of The Four, The Hidden DNA of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. He told our Hari Srinivasan how serious this is for everyone in the world.
Scott Galloway, you've written a book before on the big four tech guys, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon. We'll talk a little bit about your predictions coming up in 2019, but considering those names, what just happened in 2018?
Yeah, so you saw effectively these companies for the first time, there was what I would call a sober adult conversation around the downsides of technology. The only conversation we had in 15, 16, and 17, which was which CEO was more Jesus-like or going to run for president, right? And these were supposed to be the companies that were driving our economy, incredibly innovative. They were going to cure death, put people on Mars. And we've seen there's a real downside. And it feels like 18 was a watershed year where for the first time we said, there's some downsides here. And I also think there's a recognition that for-profit entities and companies aren't concerned with the condition of our souls. They're not going to take care of us when we get older. They're for-profit companies, and they will pretty much say and do anything to increase earnings and increase shareholder value. And we're coming to grips with the fact that, okay, that means there needs to be checks and balances on these companies. So I would say 18 was a year of recognition and an adult conversation around big tech.
You know, for so long, part of that idolatry or worship of tech came from the fact that we accepted that this was the price of innovation, that we are in an unparalleled era of innovation. And you say that's not really the case.
So key word, correct word there that you use, idolatry. We've come to maybe unfairly expect that technology plays a seminal role in humanity's progress. Technology literally saved the world. In 1944, my mother was a 4-year-old Jew living in London who was shuttled to spend her nights in the tube because of the Blitzkrieg. And we won a foot race with Hitler to split the atom. Science literally saved the world. So we've come to believe that technology actually has this benign key role in society. So when we see these innovators, we believe naturally they're going to play a more important role in our society and that they're more good, if you will. Now, if you think about, you talked about, have we come to believe this is the era of innovation? This is actually the era of non-innovation. There were more startups being started in the Carter administration than there are now. New business formation has been cut in half. And I largely believe it's because we have monopolies that created an almost impossible atmosphere for small companies to get out of the crib.
So how do you get around those monopolies when they're so dominant in their spaces that they can prevent others from even entering it just because of size and scale and money that they have to spend?
So in the U.S., we have a long, proud history of when a company becomes an invasive species and starts performing infanticide on small, promising companies. And on the other side, prematurely euthanizing big companies that tend to be better taxpayers and better employers. We have a proud history of moving in and breaking them up. The people at AT&T weren't bad people. The people at the railroads weren't evil. The people at Standard Oil were innovators. But once through a combination of macro factors, great execution, luck, one company becomes so dominant and so powerful that, again, small companies can't survive, big companies get prematurely euthanized. We move in, the DOJ and the FTC, and we break them up. And we seem to have lost the script and don't want to do that anymore. So my answer is simple, break them up.
You know, the issues around Facebook this past year, and to some extent Google and others, have increased some understanding of the amount of data that these companies are transacting in. Most consumers don't get it, but how do we reframe this relationship where clearly all the information about me is worth something to these advertisers, to these other third parties that Facebook and Google are selling me out to? But how do I change that dynamic and say, hey, this is my information, you should start paying me for it, not just giving me free email?
So people talk a big game about privacy, and I think we're coming to grips with just how much data they have on us, and we're becoming increasingly uncomfortable with it. But I think if you look at consumer behavior, people are comfortable with their privacy being violated as long as there's a coupon or utility at the end of it. At least that's what the consumer behavior shows. In my generation, and you're a little bit younger than me, but still your generation, we're more concerned than millennials who advertisers are trying to reach right now. They are comfortable with Uber knowing everywhere they're going. They're comfortable with basically posting selfies to the world, even if their accounts aren't protected, saying, this is what I'm doing in every place I'm at. So I've always thought privacy is a little bit overrated in terms of actual consumer behavior. What is, I think, a bigger issue is what we talked about, the anti-competitive behavior, which hurts and suppresses our economy, and also the notion that these platforms can be weaponized by bad actors. The notion, if the KGB tried to invent the ultimate surveillance platform in their wildest dreams, they would come up with something a fraction as effective as Facebook. This is a KGB dream come true. And then, what's even better, let's have American investors pay for it. And let's have a management team that's incentivized not to put up the safeguards necessary such that we can't weaponize it. The most innovative act of 2017 and 18 was the weaponization of Facebook by the foreign intelligence arm of the Russian government, and we paid for it. This is the most innovative act of the last 10 years. And a strange thing about humans as a species is we're easier to fool than convince we've been fooled. We have been played like no nation has been played before, but we refuse to admit it because it's embarrassing. And the folks that didn't put in place those safeguards and resulted in what is arguably the greatest dent or threat to our free elections in the last 100 years should be held accountable. And we should elect the people who will put in place the safeguards to ensure it does not happen again.
Do you think that there is any way that we take those steps? I mean, we aren't necessarily electing officials that understand tech and its place and how dominant it is now, right? And we've seen repeatedly in hearing after hearing where some of the questions coming out of these people's mouths indicate to you that they didn't get it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So 4% of our elected officials have a background in technology and engineering, and it appears the 96% always show up at those hearings, right? It was on full display. And this is an ageist comment, but the reality is a majority of our elected officials are older. And you know, I feel this way now. I'm having trouble keeping up with technology. So it's hard to regulate something you don't understand. It's difficult. We're also getting outgunned. Amazon has 88 full-time lobbyists in D.C. It's much easier to seem innovative. The fastest way to look older is to go after big tech. You look like you don't get it. It's like putting on mom jeans. You immediately look 10 years older, and you don't want to, that's the last thing you want to look if you're an elected representative who's already in your 70s, is to look like you don't get it. It's hard, you're outgunned, maybe you don't understand it. So we don't have the firepower, the human capital to go after these companies. We're seeing more of it in Europe, and I do believe you're seeing Congress and senators, Senator Mark Warren, Senator Bob Bennett from Colorado, are starting to say this is such an important issue. We need to allocate the bandwidth. We need to allocate the time and the effort. And I do think we're starting to see, or I'd like to see, the beginnings of the pushback against these firms.
Let's talk a little bit about Amazon that you've looked at closely for the last couple of years. Put in perspective the scale of their reach.
You have 2/3 of U.S. homes have a recurring revenue relationship with Amazon Prime. No cable company, no telco company has 66% share or a pipe into 2/3 of households. 80% of wealthy households have Amazon Prime. More households have Amazon Prime than a landline phone, own a gun, or voted in the 2016 elections. So you can go, the largest market share of the fastest, most profitable sector of technology, the cloud, who is it? Amazon. We have never seen a company like this so dominant across different key components of our economy. It is a juggernaut. I've been predicting for the last 5 years it would be the most valuable company in the world. But this company, if I were going to write a sequel to The Four, it would be called The One, and it would be about Amazon. Anywhere Amazon is bumping up against the other three, it's winning. It's Media Group. You guys, Amazon will do more money in media through Amazon Media Group than Snap, Twitter, and Pinterest combined this year. In 3 to 5 years, it could be the 3rd largest online media company in the world. This is Amazon. Everywhere in voice, Siri, Apple used to own voice. Now, Alexa has taken Siri behind the gym and kicked her butt. Now Amazon owns voice. What's the most innovative hardware company in the world? Well, of course, it's Apple. Well, is it? Amazon's Echo may be the most innovative hardware product. So whether it's media, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's cloud, all roads lead to the same place, and it's Seattle.
You know, you predicted correctly and early and often that this entire survivor competition between cities for HQ2 was already decided ahead of time. And you also predicted that they would buy Whole Foods. What's your prediction for 2019 and how Amazon grows?
Amazon is about to become, I predicted they'd be the first $1 trillion company. I was wrong. Apple got there first. Amazon will be the first $1 trillion company, and it'll be on the backs of one industry. They will announce something more formidable and definitive, maybe an acquisition, maybe an effort in healthcare, which right now is the most disruptible space in the world. It's pretty easy to understand if a sector is ripe for disruption. You look at its pricing relative to inflation, and if there's a gap and they haven't filled that gap with innovation, it's disruptible. Amazon has the ability to essentially skim off the healthiest families in America, maybe insure them, maybe offer them better services, and it'll create incredible havoc in the marketplace in healthcare. When they announced they were buying a $100 million online pharmacy, the retail pharmacy sector, CVS and Walgreens, shed $11 billion. When they announced they were looking at healthcare costs with JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway, the next morning in the opening bell, the healthcare industry shed $31 billion in value. And this is based on a $100 million acquisition and a press release. And this is one of the reasons, or I think evidence of how powerful Amazon has become, and it's become too powerful. Amazon can perform Jedi mind tricks on not only a company, but an entire sector. It can just think ill of a sector and begin choking it of the mother's milk of business, and that's access to capital. Amazon could take the value of any consumer company down 30% in 30 days with 30 press releases. It took the value of the largest pure-play grocer, Kroger, down a third in 30 days, just announcing it had acquired a grocer 1/11th the size of Kroger's Whole Foods. So in 2019, my prediction is Amazon begins its ascent towards $1 trillion and $2 trillion in value by making a formidable move into the most disruptible sector in the world right now, and that's U.S. healthcare.
Does that mean that they're looking at my shopping patterns and all the other information that they have on me, and then they say, well, you're buying quite a few M&Ms. Maybe you should be insured differently for diabetes?
I think you're exactly onto something. Amazon knows your body mass index. They can look at the size of your clothes. They know your diet, most likely, so they know how healthy you're eating. They know if you're in a monogamous relationship, which is an indicator of how healthy you are. They know your wealth, which is also an indicator. They know your zip code. They know most of the markers, and pretty soon they're going to probably know what pharmaceuticals you're taking. So they can put together kind of the ultimate actuarial table and assess 2/3 of households. And what if you came in one day and Alexa said, would you like to cut your health insurance costs in half? Say, Amazon, tell me more about Prime Insurance. Amazon could literally skim off the 10 healthiest households in America and start insuring them. And what is Amazon great at? Amazon is great at sitting on top of a data set and figuring out what businesses to go into and start deciding which components of healthcare they want to be in and which components they just want to outsource and say, all right, we will list the best orthopedists in your area, but we don't want to be in that business. We'll just charge them a fee to send them referrals. When Amazon goes into that business, and they also have the key asset here, and that is they have a willingness to hemorrhage money over the short and medium term. This is going to be a massively expensive venture, and Amazon has the capital, they have the data set, and they have the technology.
You know, one of the things you point out is that as this search for the second headquarters happened, this was a significant transfer of wealth.
Yeah.
That cities gave away money that should actually be going to their schools and their police and their firefighters to lure Amazon.
Yeah, HQ2 wasn't a contest, it was a con. And I realize I'm boasting here, but I said back at the beginning of the year, it's going to be one of two places. It's going to be either DC or New York. And I was wrong, it was both. And what we forget is these companies aren't run. The business is run by algorithms, but the company is controlled by a 54-year-old man who's the wealthiest man in the world. And this is what it means to be the wealthiest man in the world. It means you never have to commute. It means you become the master of no. So query me this. If you're a 54-year-old man, the only thing you can't buy is time. You got 30 more Christmases or holidays with your kids. That's it. Maybe 38 if you're really healthy. So is the wealthiest man in the world with the most options in the world, is he going to spend 14 days, much less 14 weeks a year in Indianapolis? I mean, this is human nature. I've been running companies, starting companies my whole life, and I always tell my real estate broker, we can have an office anywhere in the world as long as I can walk there. Jeff Bezos was never going to spend a lot of time in Columbus, Ohio. The Bezos have 3 homes, Seattle, New York, and DC. And now the company has 3 headquarters that each average 6.7 miles from their headquarters. This was a ruse. It was an abuse of the Commonwealth. And to your point, it was nothing but an elegant transfer of funds from municipal fire, school, and police districts to the shareholders of Amazon. It's, in my opinion, reflects poorly on the code and the character of the board that gamified these municipalities and ever gave them the impression they had any chance. The game was over before it started.
Now, I suspect Jeff Bezos will come back and say, listen, I'm going to employ 50,000 people. They're going to contribute to that local economy. The tax revenue is going to go up.
Sure, and it's a question of math and economics. And I would argue that HQ2 will go down in history in a similar vein as an Olympics. There's a lot of ribbon cutting. There's a lot of discussion of economic growth. And then 10 years later, academics and economists do the math and go, was it really worth $1.3 billion to bring those jobs to Queens? And have you, I don't know if you've ever been to a kid's auction, and they do this in my kid's school, dinner with the headmaster, and somebody gets excited and says 4,000, 5,000, 8,000, and then someone bids 9, and they say, tell you what, we're going to do 2, and they take 17,000, right? This is exactly what they did. They got everyone in a frenzied pitch, got them to a certain level, and said to the 2 cities that had won all along, New York and DC, where Jeff Bezos is building a palace, where they already have a beautiful home on the Upper East Side, and said, you need to match the term sheet that was given to us by Newark. You need to match the term sheet that was given to us by Chicago. And if you do, it's yours. And no mayor can resist the temptation of detonating a prosperity bomb in their town square. The way these guys got played, the way that Cuomo and the local officials got played in Queens, was they were always going there. And they should have known that. And they should have said, we'll give you some stuff. They did not need to give Amazon shareholders $1.3 billion for those jobs. They were coming here regardless of the subsidies.
You know, you just ended a series of video vodcasts, if you will, that you were doing. And in the last one, you had a sentence that kind of stuck out to me. It said, we no longer worship at the altar of character and kindness. We worship at the altar of innovators and billionaires. That somewhere along the line, this idolatry of tech and of the wealthy has kind of shifted our vision away from what you're talking about, which is literally just to care about other people. This is also the topic that you're heading towards in your next book.
Marx said that the problem with capitalism is that you ultimately end up in an environment where there's a lot of a world of plenty, a world of poverty, and a world of plenty. And capitalism, the society we live in, the incentives are so dramatic to be focused on economic security. If you're wealthy in this country, you're going to live longer, your kids have more opportunity, you have a greater selection set in terms of mates. I mean, it's just incredible what you can get here, how much better your life can be. So it's very easy to get on a hamster wheel where you're totally focused on economic security. And I think a lot of us fail to realize at the end of the day that economic security is a means of providing security for our families and strengthening and deepening our relationships. And there's a lot of research that say all happiness kind of comes down to a very basic thing, and that is the number and depth of your relationships. Now, we're a capitalist society. I think parents, men and women, have an obligation to create economic security for them and their kids. Kids who live in low-income households have higher resting blood pressure. We have a responsibility to be economically viable. You're going to have a better life. But the correlation between economic success and happiness, there is a correlation, but it tops out at a certain point. Once you can afford the basics, a nice home, education, vacations, which, by the way, is a ton of money in Manhattan. But at that point, happiness levels off. You don't get any unhappier. It's also a myth that billionaires are less happier, but they're not any happier than millionaires. And I think that our society